We've increased the number of civil servants by 150,000, I think, between 2019 and now. Why on earth did we now have 500,000 civil servants in the United Kingdom? We used to run the entire empire on 40,000. Why do we need 500,000 civil servants? We are very much on the back foot in terms of privacy and surveillance, but there are a lot of new pieces of what's commonly called freedom tech coming to market. And again, a lot of this, I think, is precautionary steps that an individual can take. We don't necessarily need to use them yet because we still don't quite live in a police state. But if we ever did, it's just as well to have made those preparatory steps first and know that you're a little bit ahead of the game.
This episode of the Free Cities podcast is brought to you by Veritas Village. Now, Veritas Village is an off-grid, self-sufficient place for people who are interested in living a normal, freedom-oriented life. You can reduce your reliance on corporations or government systems in your very own energy self-sufficient luxury home with its own water supply, located in a perfect climate to grow your own food. Communities use Bitcoin, and you can also buy your property with Bitcoin as well. www.ecovillages.life/free cities for more info. Please don't forget to mention the Free Cities podcast, and in the meantime, enjoy the conversation. At the core of the Free Cities idea is governance, competition between governance. It's we know competition works in the world everywhere else. It's just in government they don't really have it, and in governance they don't really have it because sure you can move country. There's not a lot of options of different types of governance models. You get a lot of obviously democracies, but modern democracies are. I mean, you just have to look at our democracy currently in the UK to see that it's not working because hardly anyone cares, as we see. Voter turnout's low, and the people that win on a small amount of the constituents who actually even voted, let alone people that actually live in the country. So it doesn't serve you, So you've got limited options. The main interesting thing that we promote are private cities. There's a couple of them around the world. They get independent jurisdiction status, legal status from the host government, so they can choose their own regulations.
Is the free zone in Dubai at all similar to that?
Well, free zones, yeah, they are. I mean, Dubai is almost one whole free zone now. But they were part of the evolution for sure. They were the special economic zone aspect. The newest sort of evolution are special economic zones where you reside. At the moment, special economic zones, if you were a business, like when you came to Dubai Financial District, you brought your capital over and you got preferred deals, and the main reason that they were so successful is because they did away with Sharia law within that small bit and brought in common law. And that's what attracted people. But there was no resident tax breaks or etc. I mean, obviously Dubai didn't have any tax anyway, so it was all good. But the new versions, the new iterations, which are the two main ones are in Honduras now, are independent from the government of Honduras on regulation. They still have to abide by all the laws of, don't murder anyone, don't do this, don't do that. But businesses can come and start with various regulations. They can choose from OECD regulations from around the world. And also, as a resident, you get the same tax breaks. So you get 2% tax there, or 2% corporate tax. It's ideally what we want to see in the next 100, 150 years are thousands of competing smaller places. And I think I've heard you talk about this, actually, the idea that one of the things that's kind of broken about what's going on now. In fact, actually, it's very difficult to know where to start because it's such a huge subject. But I think it might be useful to use our own home country, the UK, as an example of how a place can be run particularly badly. Yes. I'm not even pointing fingers. I don't. When you look at all the problems with the way that governance works, I don't necessarily blame the people that are doing all this stuff. I think there's a lot of well-intentioned people doing. I just think the incentives are there and easy to take to run the country as they are. And I think, in a nutshell, the way things have evolved now is you've basically got productive people, entrepreneurs, staying clear of the government because they don't want to go anywhere near it, but feeling the wrath of the government, which is run by the other group of people who tend to be career politicians, non-productive people, and the whole thing's a mess now because you've got people struggling to run a business or people struggling to create a better life for themselves because the people who they don't even like or respect, or certainly don't respect as business people, are creating all these legislations and laws that make their life even harder. And the result, really, when you actually look at it, is they go away. They go somewhere else. I don't know many people now in the UK that I know who have the stay and fight attitude. There's not many of them left. Not if I took a survey of my friends, most people are like, right, this is very difficult. There's a limit to how long I can pursue this. It's easier for me just to move if they have the kind of situation in their life where they can move. Obviously, if you've got a family and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. You're kind of quite heavily embedded, I think, in the world of. You're a former lawyer, right? You are a lawyer, still a lawyer, yeah. But also you do work with the governments, you advise, you do all this kind of stuff.
I pester is probably a nicer way of, probably a more accurate way.
Fair enough.
But should we get rolling?
Yeah, let's go. We already are. Just tilt the mic up a little bit so it's going a bit more towards you. That's it. But yeah, so just start there.
Sure. So as you say, I am a lawyer, so fairly embedded in the way that the system works. Just to clarify, though, I'm not a lawyer who necessarily drafts laws or who litigates. I was always a transactional lawyer, so I started off in M&A, moved into special situations, which are effectively trying to rescue collapsing companies, and then became more and more involved in the regulatory side, more on the critique rather than the drafting. So a lot of the work I do with Bitcoin policy, the group that I set up with Susie, whom you recently had on, Bitcoin Policy UK, is trying to advise regulators and politicians who are drafting bad laws and how to make them better. Because as you've rightly pointed out, the incentive for any politician coming in, and actually while you were saying that, it occurred to me I forget who said this, but the raison d'etre of a politician is to create more law. And I think it's impossible to point to a single government, maybe Millet is doing it, a single government anywhere where there are fewer laws in the statute book after they leave office than before they arrived. The whole purpose of you being in Parliament is to make more laws. And at some point, that it seems to be that is the only reason for your being any longer. And if you fail to make more laws, somehow you failed as a politician. I think that's an idea that's well worth re-examining.
Well, it's also the fact that it's interesting. On this podcast, I've interviewed a lot of people who came from former communist regimes, and it's as a Brit, it's fascinating to hear what it was like. And one of the things that everyone talks about are the pettiness of the superhuman number of laws that start appearing in the late stages of it. And not being funny, mate, but I woke up recently and I looked and I was just, I don't know, reading Twitter, looking at what was going on and thinking, it's happening. It's happening. The kind of stuff that, I looked a few up before this interview. There was it got to the point where they were banning blue jeans. Haircuts had to be a certain length. We're not there yet, but for me, the canary in the coal mine's already singing. There's talk of banning VPNs ever since the new bill came out, the online safety bill. I've heard already people are reporting that VPNs need to be banned. I've seen that kind of mentality in China, and I remember thinking, wow, this is full on. This is full on. This is obviously not good. VPNs are absolutely fine. I've used VPNs for years, and my whole family does. And it's purely to stay anonymous and to not have our data leaked, and it's none of your business what I'm looking at online.
It was officially encouraged by one of the firms that I worked at whenever we went on a foreign trip. Take certain steps in order to protect the data that's on your phone because it's valuable, and so is your personal data. You mentioning banning VPNs, I don't know if you saw a post recently by a human rights activist who works for the Human Rights Foundation, about Myanmar, they brought in a new rule that the police can stop and search you, and they can look at your phone, and if they find a VPN on it, there's grounds for arrest immediately. So it's not, if the UK wants to put itself in the same bucket as Myanmar, we're doing a bloody good job of it so far.
Well, they are. This is what I mean. They are. The online safety bill is ridiculous. It's not, it's porn and kids. That's the way they sell it. But it's not. If you are someone who just uses a normal internet connection, many websites that you go to now, which are nothing to do with porn, are saying, give us your credit card details. And this is wrong. This is already happening as far as I'm concerned now. This is it.
Yeah, it's worth drilling into that a little bit. I don't think many people will have read exactly what the legislation says. Why should they? I think it's as long as War and Peace.
Probably, yeah.
And probably less well written. But if you look at the scope of what can potentially be banned, it's extraordinarily wide, and is left largely within the purview of Ofcom and the Secretary of State, who can increase the ambit of what's deemed to be harmful content. And it's interesting you mentioned the kind of websites that are being stopped. The day it came into force, I went on to Reddit's craft beer, and I posted a screenshot of what happened. I can't read about craft beer unless I prove my age. I saw a record of a hamster owners forum. So, which said they had to take the forum down because they said, we're just a small organisation. We cannot fund the cost of compliance. So the only option we have is to come off, because otherwise we'll get an enormous fine. I had a rather interesting thought that Mumsnet, the forum.
I know it too well.
You know it too well.
Too well, yeah. Well, I'm always quoted Mumsnet. That's one of those things that my wife. Well, less so now actually. But when we had small kids, I used to get the Mumsnet quotes all the time.
Exactly. I mean, we all, I think our children maybe of similar ages. It occurred to me that probably Mumsnet's going to fall foul of this as well, because they talk a lot about wine and gin on Mumsnet. And
too much.
I'm actually not joking. Because the rules apply to any forum that allows user-generated content, which could potentially be harmful, and that would include talking about alcohol, according to the Reddit. I suspect the Guardian comment sections, to the extent that they enable you to mention wine and beer, should probably maybe it'd be a funny exercise to troll them and report the Guardian to Ofcom.
But do you think then that is part of the plan? I mean, in the end, it's obvious to me at least that there will be ID to surf the internet if you want to do it the legitimate way. There'll be a million and one workarounds, obviously, but just like there are now in China and behind the Great Firewall, you can still do most of what you want to do if you just know how. And like you say, if you were a foreigner going in, they might even advise you to do that. A governmental employee might even be advised to do that, and just don't do it at home. It's not what we do,
Yeah, I think there's a non-trivial risk of that happening, which is terrifying. It's the equivalent of requiring a license to leave your house and to walk around the streets. I'm not talking about driving a car, proving that you have the necessary skill set in order to operate a piece of potentially dangerous machinery, I think is generally a sensible thing. And the same with the pilot's license. You want someone operating that machinery to be changed, but that speaking is not something for which anyone needs particular training, and having ideas is a natural human thing to do. And the attempt to police both of those things, I think, is terrifyingly shocking. And because of the very clever way that this has been done, and again, I'm often at a bit of a loss here. I'm torn between the two ends of the spectrum. On the one hand, as you mentioned earlier, I think a lot of this was originally well-intentioned. We want to prevent, suicidal ideation, for example. I think that's an honourable aim. Anyone who's experienced, self-harm or suicide in their family would, I think, support wanting to prevent people being encouraged from hurting themselves. And again, no one wants children to see unsuitable material online. So I think we can agree that those things are honourable aims. But then extrapolating that out to an attempt to stop people thinking things, free consenting adults from reading things and having opinions that an authority figure doesn't like, that's very chilling. And we certainly in the UK, we get a bit I think we get a bit complacent with the fact that we've lived in a relatively free society for so long. We don't think that can happen here. We're recording this in a former Soviet Socialist Republic. And it's within 1991, I think, Latvia finally got independence after the wall came down. It's very, very recent in what is now a member of the EU, where these kind of things happen. So we know, what's the quote? The tree of liberty must be perpetually refreshed with the blood of patriots. And hopefully it won't come to that, but complacency develops relatively easily if you haven't been tested, doesn't it?
You do find, I don't know whether you've spoken to many locals, but we work a lot out of Prague, and everyone in those kind of countries, it's still fresh in their minds, and you get phenomenally solid, good people there. And, you're right. Nobody back home would consider. I think the same thing is happening in Canada right now. Canadians think they live most of them still think they live in the best country in the world, and it's a beautiful place, no doubt about it. But the way it's run is creeping, and it's the creep that does it. The worst, the most insidious part of it. But interestingly, talking about the online safety bill again, really, what's happening is it's going to come down to the compliance, which is really bad, because the rules could be stupid, which they are. We can look at them now and go, that's ridiculous and stupid. But people will enforce it now. And the more they enforce it, the more ridiculous it'll be. And the less likely that there'll be a backtrack. Do you think they're going to relinquish the sort of craft beer Reddit forum? Do you think they're going to say, do you know what, let's let them off? No, they can't really do that unless the whole country goes, this is ridiculous. But most people probably, especially Brits, aren't going to. And before you know it, it's going to be so late. They're going to be, we are going to be arguing with, I was talking to Susie about this yesterday. There was someone ranting on Nosta the other day about a parcel delivery that came to their house that they had to sign for because it was an over 18 item. And the guy insisted on, I need ID. I need to photograph it for their app. And he's like, no, I'm 50 or 45. I'm more than 18, obviously. No, computer says no. And in the end, he just had to turn this package away. And that's what it comes to. You get these ridiculous situations. That's what happened towards the end of the Soviet Empire. These ridiculous rules that people then enforce, and the people who this burgeoning set of people who are enforcing the rules is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. They're like, oh, justify my job. We need to do this. Oh, that would be a good idea. Let's do this. And you get this horrendous situation, which I think I wouldn't say we're in the late stages of, well, possibly we are, but we're living in a world now where you have to think about so many rules, and they're quite punitive as well. It's not like that. A lot of them aren't obvious. A lot of them are just, you've discovered the rule and you've broken it. It's your problem. And you're like, there's 450,000 rules. What you want me to know all of them? And it requires, and this is the really disturbing part of it. It requires a complete rehashing of everything. It appears to me, and I don't really know how you do that. I mean, the two options are collapse or leave, isn't it? It's like, as an individual, the whole thing either collapses and starts again, and that's always. That's not all, but it's seldom a good thing, actually. I think even the results of that kind of system, you normally get the void filled by something similar. Or you leave and you go and look for a place where, in my case, it would be you either go where lots and lots of really rich people are, or you go to a place where lots and lots, where a country that really hasn't got a system ingrained yet, somewhere that's to be left alone. You've either got to be very rich, or you just go and live somewhere that hasn't quite made it yet.
It's surprising that it's so difficult just to be left alone.
Yes, which is the base of it, for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
So how do we get left alone then?
Well, I mean, quite a few things to pick up on there, actually. So before we sort of segue away from the online safety bill, the key reason why I personally am so opposed to it is actually one of privacy and data collection. my general principle for giving information away on the internet is that you should assume that anything you give to an organization, whether that's a corporation or a government, is going to become public information relatively quickly, because we can demonstrate, I can reel off a list as long as my arm of recent data leaks. They include data leaks from the Ministry of Defence in Britain. If the Ministry of Defence can't protect information, who the hell can? HMRC leaking data continuously. The NHS leaking private medical details and blood sample records. You can go on and on and on. I think the biggest one I saw recently was Ticketmaster, which leaked more email addresses than there are people on the planet. So, I mean, basically, rule of thumb: if you give, and this is where I think the act is so dangerous. If you give your age verification details to any of these websites, you are creating, and have, I think, in just the 2 or 3 weeks that the act has been live, huge data pots were already being completed. Because I think your point about compliance is completely right. A lot of people will simply tut and roll their eyes, and they'll age verify, they'll give their name, they'll give their driving license. The people who are incentivized not to comply are, 16-year-old boys, or people who care about their privacy. And I think that's always going to be a relatively small subset. But what's almost inevitably going to happen, and your question as to what's going to happen to this act specifically, when the act begins to affect the way that the people who made it live their lives, then I think you have a chance for changing it. Because I suspect most of the politicians who voted for this didn't realise the full implications of it. In fact, there was a very interesting exchange that I had on Twitter with a sitting MP who didn't realise that it also applied to technology companies. Actually, she deleted this post after she made it. She said, it only applies to porn, and age verification happens all the time. Why is the harm? No, each of those 3 limbs of her post were incorrect. She clearly hadn't read the act. It's not just for porn, it's for all kinds of things. Effectively an ever-expanding set at the discretion of the Secretary of State. And, I mean, the danger of huge pots of data is completely obvious. So I think it's going to be a very interesting piece of news to watch out for when, I think, as is almost inevitable, Pornhub's data set is going to be leaked at some point. There's going to be a lot of fun to be had going through that and seeing how many MPs are in it. And
they're not going to give, seriously, I mean, it's bad enough giving your details to Reddit, let alone to Pornhub. I mean, the moment you're tapping in your details must be a sad moment.
Well, exactly. And what's doubly horrific, and I don't want to get too graphic here, but a lot of these sites are actually using age estimation using your face.
Are they?
Yeah, they are.
How are they doing? Oh, you mean when you click the button to sign up? So not
take control of your webcam. Who in their right minds gives control of their webcam to a third party company? You unless you're very, very
banks do it.
Well, yeah, it's terrifying, isn't it?
Yeah.
That data they allege is deleted. Most people don't understand how difficult it is to delete something once it's been recorded on a hard drive.
I don't think it ever gets deleted.
Well,
why would it? Why data storage exists, and if it's not full, why not store everything?
Exactly. And most people don't realise that when you hit delete on a file on your hard drive, the file isn't deleted. It's just that the pathway to it is cleared so that it can be recorded over again. Anyway, so where I'm going with this is I think there's a very, very substantial risk that these data pots, which have been collected by embarrassing websites, will be leaked, and they will contain details of people who potentially voted for this. And that's the point at which I think they may consider that perhaps it's gone too far, and maybe we should think of a different way of achieving this.
Really, though? I mean, I think at that point it just gets more absurd. My first thoughts of the kind of surveillance state happened probably in the 80s when I look back. People were talking about it then, being tracked and monitored, and et cetera, et cetera. And I remember feeling quite depressed about it back then. I was like in my I was an 18-year-old boy thinking, yeah, this does make sense. And that was even before the internet really started kicking in. Because once that happened, you see the ability to monitor it just increases exponentially. In fact, it scales forever. That's the terrible thing about it. I think when you look at a lot of previous authoritarian regimes, they often collapse under the weight of their own size because they can't find enough people to enforce what they're doing. But actually, algorithms are infinitely scalable, and you can see that the whole system will turn into a way of testing compliance is what it is. I mean, I could easily predict, for example, that the next step, when they realize that the Online Safety Act is an absolute shit show, they'll go, do you know what? The easiest thing saves us money. Just everything you look at. Like, so you have to sign up for the internet. Then we don't have to worry about this, that, and the other. And then they've got you. Because at that point now, you can integrate all that data into a "Are you being a good citizen" score, which we see already starting in a number of countries around the world. And if you're not, you lose access to this, you lose privileges, you lose this. And then the law, you're a lawyer, you see the law suddenly disappears and it becomes an algorithm. You know, here are the rules. When you break them, you lose privileges. And you don't even need to enforce them through legal means. I mean, I'm going way into the future there.
No, but you're right. And the cost of enforcement is something I return to a lot. And it's historically been a relatively decent defense against bad law, frankly. So, obviously we're here for a Bitcoin conference at the moment. And one of the key things that Bitcoiners go on about a lot is Executive Order 6102. Obviously the confiscation of private ownership of gold in the United States, which was actually a relatively ineffective law because thinking about it, it functioned in a very similar way to the Online Safety Act. A lot of people complied, a lot of people didn't. Now, the cost of enforcement of 6102 was vast. The government, even the US government, couldn't send agents on house-to-house searches, so they relied on a relatively large proportion of compliance and wrote off the non-compliance without house-to-house searches in order to find your gold. And in a digital sense, until relatively recently, house-to-house search equivalent of going through vast amounts of digital material was, again, relatively hard and often human-driven. But I think you correctly point out that if we're moving into a world of algorithmic searching and enforcement, as we clearly are, it comes down to data processing functionally. The processing of facial recognition data, for example, is reaching quite scary levels and is also being rolled out at scary levels in the United Kingdom. Big Brother Watch, with whom we've worked on a few important ventures pushing back against CBDCs, for example, they are campaigning to try and roll that back. But it's an uphill battle because, as you say, if a government's given access to lots of data that it can process extremely quickly and powerfully, why not? They want to control their citizens as much as possible. This is a complete inversion for me of, Alan Moore's famous line out of V for Vendetta. People shouldn't be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people. They are our servants as long as we live in true democracies. And the idea that they are there to tell us what to do and how to behave and what to think and what to say is completely abhorrent, I think, to anyone who feels the way that we do.
You say we shouldn't be afraid of our governments. I did show signs of fear of my own government yesterday. I found myself saying something on this podcast about VPNs, and I let it roll. But in the back of my mind, I was thinking I might have to cut that out. I then fortunately, I checked. It's not illegal to bypass the online safety bill yet.
Not for you.
Right. Okay. So it's using a VPN. So I'm going to leave it in now. But my instant thought after that is, well, you could, in the old days, I would have said, look, say I've done like 150 episodes of this podcast. It's like, yeah, little things slip by, they disappear. You can't really be held accountable. It's too difficult. Now, not true at all. An AI would take 10 minutes to scan everything I've ever said and pull out the parts where I said things that are illegal. As in, that's why I had to check.
Thought crime.
Yeah, well, not even a thought crime, a real crime. Me admitting to using a VPN. Like I say, had I have gone online after that interview yesterday and discovered that, yes, I was committing an offence, I would have pulled it out of the episode. I would have just cut that bit out. And that is me being scared of my government, right?
Exactly,
there.
and that's wrong.
Totally wrong, because they can be far more petty than me. And when it comes down to things like, if you have any kind, I mean, governments tend to leave you alone until you start garnering attention from a certain number of people. I suppose there's a limit, and suddenly, right, this is a person of interest now. As soon as you're a person of interest, in a way, you're doomed in many senses of the word, because at the very last moment, they've got more resources than you. I'm not even sure how you defend yourself against an attack, a big attack from the state like that. If you're someone who's got a big mouthpiece, a lot of people are listening to you, not least because they could bankrupt you legally, just take you to court over some ridiculous thing, let it run for so long that
I think you have to go into exile.
Right, exactly. You move to another country and then you start reporting from there or whatever.
Yes.
But that's not good. And that shouldn't be happening in our country.
Absolutely not. On your worry about VPNs, I don't know if you saw this immediately after the act came out. Politico did some digging into MPs' expenses. And it turns out rather amusingly that Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, and Sarah Champion, just to name two people, are not only using VPNs, but they're also charging them back to us as expenses, which is nice. This was revealed on the same day that Peter Kyle went on all of the news shows and basically said, this is a paraphrase, not a quote, if every time you use a VPN, a child dies.
Yeah, I think you posted that one on Twitter, didn't you? The clip. It's so grating, though. It's so like the worst thing about that whole sentiment is that, and you're a parent, it's none of the government's business what your kids are looking at online. It's your business. You're their father. You have a chat with them. If they're rebellious, you ban them yourself. You don't ask someone who really doesn't give a shit about you to try and ban them ineffectively. Because they don't even know them, they're not even close by them. Well,
I don't know if you saw this. That someone had actually set out in relatively significant detail how they would have gone about protecting children from unsuitable material, and a lot of it's to do with certification. So, for example, an adult website is required to broadcast as part of its data package. And when you try to access that website, this site contains 18 plus material, and then you can set your router and your devices either to accept or reject 18 plus or 18 below material. So your child's phone, for example, you could put a setting there to say that this phone is used by a 12-year-old and material for 12 and under only can be viewed on this. And then the device will ping the website, and once that certification has been recognized and acknowledged, then it's parental guided access to unsuitable material, which I think is what we should all be doing. You care for your children. You decide what they can and cannot see. It's not up to the state to tell me, if my 17-and-a-half-year-old wants to read about craft beer.
The craft beer one is very funny.
It's horrible.
But the other thing is as well that that certification method also doesn't work, because plenty of websites aren't going to certificate. People think Pornhub, everyone uses Pornhub, I think. Yes, a lot of people do, but there's probably more porn websites than any other genre on the planet, probably.
I'd assume so. And,
assume so.
Well. So
I just got this data set here. Look, there are.
I forget as well, the actual volume of material on the internet that's not crawlable, for example, by Google search engines, and is only accessible through Tor, is mind-blowing. But that comes back to a point you made earlier around, the majority of people won't use Tor and they won't know how to access the dark web. And the huge worry, and this quite apart from the honeypot issue that we raised earlier, the huge worry is the people who actually want to access this material are now going to be driven into places where a whole lot of other most horrific stuff is also lurking. So not only is the act illogical, it's unenforceable, and it's arguably worse than the situation we had before.
I think that's par for the course these days. I could quote you a number of things like that in the modern world that don't work. The most obvious one of late was taxing wealthy people and then ending up with less revenue. I mean,
yes.
There are incompetent people, I don't know whether incompetence is the right word. There are people who have risen to positions of power in at least our government who don't understand, they just don't think they don't think things through. They kind of stop at the original idea. It's like, I know, let's tax the rich. Yay, right, let's get that sorted, without necessarily wondering that the rich might leave at that point.
And the
answer is, well, the rich shouldn't leave, because that's not right. It's like, the rich are going to leave. People are going to use VPNs. People don't really care what you say. Like, they do it because you're bigger than them and they want to comply to make their life easier on the whole. But a lot of what you say is complete nonsense. And nowadays, I couldn't tell you a single politician who says anything coherent. Actually, no, that's not true. That's not true. There is a new sort of group of politicians coming through. We see it in the UK now. It's a bit like what happened in America with Trump. A number of interesting people are actually starting to speak on alternative media. I'm talking about the mainstream. If you turn the TV on, if you listen to talk radio, you hear nonsense. You hear that double speak. You hear people skirting questions. It's so obvious now that you have this world where there are people who can talk candidly for 2 hours and people who can't. And the people that can't talk candidly for 2 hours are currently in charge. And the people who can talk candidly for 2 hours, so, listen to anyone for 2 hours, you get a good sense of who they are. And they're there, and their arms are up in the air going, what the hell's going on? But my worry is we're obviously, well, according to me at least, we'll have a regime change at the next election. And it'll, as far as I'm concerned, it will go to one of the new parties. I think everyone's underestimating how quickly a change like that can happen. But they'll get into power and they'll just hit a brick wall like everyone else and go, oh my God, this is a shit show. Well, I can't just stop doing what everyone else has been doing.
Well, I think a huge problem, and I've spoken about this before, I'm interested to hear your take on it too. The real power in the United Kingdom is the bureaucratic civil service, and it's utterly unaccountable to the electorate. It's unaccountable in many ways to ministers and to MPs. So much focus is on who's in power, which government is there, but we always forget the faceless people who sit behind them. My contemporaries, my friends from university who went into the civil service at the age of 22, 23 and are going to stay there for 40 years, entrenched in these enormous buildings, incentivized to keep their jobs and to keep adding to the numbers of civil servants that there are. We've increased the number of civil servants by 150,000, I think, between 2019 and now. Why on earth we now have 500,000 civil servants in the United Kingdom? We used to run the entire empire on 40,000. Why do we need 500,000 civil servants?
You probably need them because they're not doing the job well enough. They probably need more people to do a simple job. I mean,
exactly right. Did you see the headline recently? Reeves says that she's going to have to massively increase the size of the civil service to address the inefficiency problem. I thought you were going to mention that headline, but that's exactly what.
Well, that's a real headline.
That's a real headline. Yeah, I think it was a Telegraph.
That's ridiculous. Oh yeah, well maybe that's a hit piece. Is it?
Yeah, perhaps. But what you said.
Did she say it like that?
Yeah, no.
I mean, did she literally say it like that?
Maybe we can look it up and stick it in your show notes afterwards. But
I mean, I don't care anymore about. I expect that now. You expect bullshit from these people because I think what the life they're living and is just full of these non-complementary ideas and paradoxes, and it's like all terrible regimes. They fall down with honesty kills them. You can't just come out and say, like, I'm longing for the day that someone just says the truth out there, or like, do you know what? We could have done better, but we tried our hardest and this happened. And now these people have been disenfranchised, but we're going to try a different way. Or Millet, Millet is like bulletproof when you look at the way he's dealing with things. He really doesn't give a shit. And he doesn't care to burden that uncomfortable feeling that maybe a lot of people are going to dislike him. I suppose the advantage in Argentina was a lot of people were looking for change. I'm not sure. What's your take on how many people in the UK, for example, are looking for change?
I'm a bit more optimistic, actually. I think it's a non-trivial amount now. And I say that partly because if you look at the speed of collapse and support for Labour, even among left-leaning people. And, I'm reasonably left-leaning myself. I categorise myself as sort of left-leaning libertarian. I think the state does have some functions. I tend to devolve to the Hayekian 4 or 5 key functions as the principal ones, and maybe toss in some healthcare and education for those who can't afford it on top of that. But even among my own relatively left-leaning friends, the collapse in support for Labour has been catastrophic, and I think it's largely because they've had 14 years to prepare, have come in and I don't know if I can swear on the podcast. Utterly fucked everything up. Your Laffer curve tax point is a perfect example. That's first order thinking only, without following the consequences through. But I really think a lot about both the kinds of people who go into politics and who go into the civil service, because they are individual human beings like you and I. I genuinely believe most people want to do a good job and they want to do good things. I think the number of people who go into power wanting to trample on the faces of the poor is hopefully relatively small, because most humans aren't like that. But there's something about the inefficiency of a monumentally disorganized state that means, I think a lot of it is throwing your hands up in the air and just accepting that this is the way that things always have been, and so this is the way we do things here. And you see this not just in governments, but in very big organizations as well. Actually, Microsoft is an interesting one to look at. Microsoft, obviously under Gates and Paul Allen, very nimble originally, became incredibly dominant, and then it became extraordinarily moribund for a very long period of time. And part of that was that people would join Microsoft full of vim and vigor and good ideas, and get bogged down in an extraordinarily lengthy approval process to do and change anything, which Satya Nadella has actually reinvigorated and turned around by stripping away some of those inefficiencies. So we do have real-world examples of scenarios where companies have taken the wrong path and can go the other way. And I think we're beginning to see some of them in nation states. In Argentina, as an example. El Salvador, I'm still in two minds around how El Salvador is working. Obviously, some people are of the view that Bukele is a dictator. He's obviously got a very, very strong law and order focus. But at the same time, he's drastically reduced the murder rate and made it a safer country to live in. So you pay his piper and take your choice.
Yeah. I mean, what you're describing, in a way, is a natural life cycle of an organization. Yep. And the question is, what happens at the point of death? Is it death or rebirth? Is it change? Is it transformation? I was just trying to think whether or not I thought Argentina was transforming, or was it? I mean, there was no bloody battle, obviously. So, and also we have to wait to see. The problem with all these things, I'm with you on Bukele. I think, I've been to El Salvador a number of times, and everyone I've ever spoken to loves him there. So I'm fully on board with that. The only worry I have is that he is still a leader and a politician. Mm. And I remember various countries in Central America and South America who had, in the beginning, had similar scenarios. Everyone super excited. You could even say what happened. I mean, it's happened to us even. Do you remember things can only get better? I was working in London. I was a journalist then. I worked for the Independent. And I remember getting swept up in all that shit, and thinking, wow, change is coming. Or Trump, change is coming, and then government's going to get smaller. Doge is going to smash everything. Oh, wait a sec, government's getting bigger. We're spending more money. In the end, do we get to trust any of these people?
it's very difficult to see how we can. And in some ways, I believe the only choice you have is to be as independent on an individual basis as you possibly can, whether that's remaining where you are and living your life as freely as you can, or unfortunately moving somewhere else. And I think it's a supertanker problem. The state, and by the state in the UK, I mean the civil service and the government, is so preponderant. And so, and again, returning to a lot of my friends who work in the civil service, they're genuinely good people. I've been friends with some of them for 25 years. So I trust them implicitly as individuals. But they're stuck in an organization where to make the simplest decision requires 5 different levels of approval, 18 different forms. And 3 of the people who need to approve those forms are not in the office because they've done their 25 hours for the week in the first 3 days. So they get the rest of the week off. And then they get a much bigger pension than I will when they retire, which will be funded for by continual debasement and dilution of the currency. So, I mean, it's impossible to. And you mentioned the Soviet Socialist Republic before. It's just you get to a point where the bureaucracy is so completely incomprehensible that you can't get anything done. Trying to build anything in the United Kingdom, I return again to the idea that. High energy is high quality of life and high income. There are no low energy, high income countries on the planet. So the whole idea that we need to be using less energy is, to my mind, completely absurd. We need to be using more energy. It's not as though energy is a scarce resource in the universe. Fundamentally, everything is made of it. That's the mass energy equivalence equation, for God's sake. It's a question of harnessing it and storing it and deploying it. Obviously, storing energy is hard, and the various solutions for that. Trying to build a new nuclear plant in the United Kingdom, which to my mind is what we should be doing everywhere. Rolls-Royce, one of the builders of SMRs, God knows how difficult it's going to be them to deploy their SMRs in the United Kingdom, because our planning regulations are literally Byzantine. You talked earlier about collapse. It's interesting to look at previous collapses of extraordinarily complex bureaucracies, and the reason we call these things Byzantine is because it was the tail end of a 1400-year-old empire filled with grand viziers and strange eunuchs who had extraordinarily complicated job titles, and no one knew what they did.
You can learn a lot of lessons from the past, though. The places that lasted the longest ran in a specific way. I'm thinking of places like Venice that were run by merchants, basically. You look at Dubai now, in a way, it's run by merchants, in a way. I mean, it's run by families. But there's no politics to speak of. If you're an immigrant, 90% of Dubai is immigrants. And you go there to make money. You don't go there to vote on anything. This is why in the Free Cities movement, private cities is one of our big things. Thousands of competing small jurisdictions, not necessarily cities, but just makes sense because the reason that all this stuff we're talking about, the bad governance is happening is because there's no competition in governance. There's no accountability in governance, especially in the civil service. I mean, the civil service, as you mentioned, is the worst out of all of them. Do people lose their jobs in the civil service? I don't know.
Yeah, they get promoted, actually.
Right.
It's funny you mentioned that. You probably saw recently there was an MOD official who emailed the Taliban a list of the enemies of the Taliban, including our own spies from MI6.
Why? Just in a chat by mistake.
It's worth looking up. That was why, and this was covered up by a super injunction for 3 years. This was why we pulled a whole load of the Afghans who'd been our allies into the United Kingdom, because they were at risk of being murdered, obviously, because all of their names and addresses had been sent.
That's right.
Yeah.
I read
that story.
Yeah.
It's worth looking up what happened to the chap who sent it. I believe he's now been promoted.
Yeah.
But worth fact checking me on that. But
well, I mean, name me a politician who'd done a shitty job, who didn't end up in a nice job straight afterwards.
Well, I mean, you mentioned Tony Blair earlier. How much is he worth now?
He's also, I mean, he's a really nasty character. I worked at the Independent, right? And we did a lot of politics. I was a photographer, And one election cycle, it wasn't the things can only get better one. It was another one. I was on their bus.
No way.
Yeah. Well, we all got assigned to different buses. That was, I don't know whether they still do that now, do they? I mean, there was like 20 photographers back then. There's probably one agency guy now who does it. And we used to go to the conferences, and I spent a fair bit of time with Tony Blair in relatively intimate situations. Not that he would know who I was now. But he's a really nasty character now. I didn't notice it at the time. I wasn't really looking. But if you look at what he does in the world, he's that kind of, he's our guy that we send out to convince other countries to do this, that, and the other. You know, during COVID, he was massive on digital ID. Whenever you hear Tony Blair say anything, it's like Digi-ID, you know. He's one of those guys. I don't know what your views on the World Economic Forum are, but he's one of those guys who's a slimy WEF kind of guy. And
I always thought he was slimy, to be honest. But even back in '97,
yeah, I didn't. I was swept. I think I was swept up in the wow, change is coming. You know, I mean, he's. In fact, if you look closely, there's a picture of me on the internet shaking his hand, and it's nothing to do. He was just an award I got. He was just giving an award. But it does look like I'm like, but no, probably shouldn't say that. But no, what do you think of the World Economic Forum and all that kind of stuff? I mean, are they as bad as everyone makes out? You know,
I not as perhaps I should have spent more time watching what they say. I tend to have focused on them from a sort of CBDC perspective, and I think they share characteristics with other people in government that I also find worrying and troubling in a nutshell. So, you know, a couple of quotes from various different WEF forums over the years. There was a chap talking about CBDCs, and he was getting very excited that you could permission tokens to be used only for food, for example, or for water. Which I find extraordinarily chilling. It cuts against the very nature of money for me, which is the most saleable good and can be freely exchanged for anything that you need or want. And there's another guy whose name I can't now remember, but he was, I think he was an ex-Indian central banker, and it's worth digging up the clip of him. He's got this horrible smile on his face when he's talking about how excited he would be to prevent money being used to buy tobacco or alcohol or other things. So I think that's a characteristic that a lot of those people who speak at these forums would share with the worst privacy offenders in our own governments, which is that they have and it comes back to a point we made earlier. You know, politicians' raison d'etre now seems to be to make more laws. So if they've made laws of, you know, the existing statute book, it never gets smaller, it only gets bigger. So they need to keep on looking for new things to make laws about. And one of the areas they're obsessed with making laws about now is personal freedom to do what you want, go where you want, and to spend what you want as you see fit. So I think, sorry, there was a bit of a long-winded answer.
No, but that's what all those things you just mentioned are all part of the same thing, which is what, for want of a better word, a sort of social credit score. They're all to do with that. Travel, you know, what you can and can't do, basically. And algorithms will enforce them. You won't need a knock on the door by the police to say you've used up your carbon allowance today. You just won't be able to buy a ticket. Yeah. And when you get to the station, if you've got a fake ticket, the facial ID will say, no, that's not your ticket. You know, is it? I really don't know. I used to be quite depressed about it. Then Bitcoin appeared in my life, and suddenly I was full of hope. And now I feel like I've got over another hill in the life cycle of all this stuff. And it is, Bitcoin's still phenomenally, it's hope, no question about it. But if you can't spend it because you are wading through a sea of bureaucracy and KYC, and I mean, it already happens now. You can't buy a car with Bitcoin anonymously unless you know a friend who's selling up a Bitcoin. You can do small transactions anonymously, and you can do $100 billion $100 billion type transactions. You know, they're not taxed at that end of the spectrum, but in the middle there, where the government derives taxes, they want to know every single thing you're doing, and that's the thing that most people, when they look at it to begin with, go, yeah, that seems fair. they've got to know what we're spending our money on. But you and I and people who care about that kind of stuff know that that is horrendous. And even just morally, that's wrong. I mean, we lived on cash for years. We lived on gold coins for years. No one knew who was swapping what. It's really important. It's really none of anyone's business. It's a total mindset of liberty that most people don't seem to have these days, or it's been beaten out of them, at least in our country.
That point about cash is fundamentally important. The reason cash exists is because it enables people who don't know each other to transact with each other. The whole conceptual ideation of a banknote is that you and I don't know each other. We don't need to trust each other. I don't even need to get your name if you come into a shop and hand me over a £10 note.
You definitely don't need your name.
Exactly.
It's none of your business.
Absolutely none. Absolutely none. But people have, I think, part of the process of moving away from cash and into tapping, people have lost sight of the fact that money is a KYC-less technology. And as you were talking there, I also I think I'm with you on having gone over that second hill. I became very excited, and I'm now more cognizant of the fact that we are very much on the back foot in terms of preserving, frankly, our ability to transact. I go on about this a lot, because I think that's a very, very fundamental freedom. The train ticket point you made, I know in Hong Kong, when people were going to the pro-democracy protests, their travel was being monitored, and they developed a system whereby you'd leave you'd leave spent tickets in machines for other people to pick up to try and throw people off the track. But being able to, I think, for merchants accepting Bitcoin is a huge Trojan horse to keep this going forwards, because once you can pay for things in a currency that's not controlled by the government, that's quite a powerful push back against it. And you said obviously the government wants to know exactly what we're spending. The reason they want to know what we're doing with our money is because they want it. We forget.
They want a cut of it.
Yes, exactly. Government is fundamentally a non-productive enterprise. Governments only make money either by taxing their population or by borrowing. And
it's just getting harder and harder for them.
Both of them are getting really difficult. And you asked earlier, do I think a change is coming in the United Kingdom? I really do think that we are on the verge of some kind of sovereign debt crisis. The extent of our indebtedness is enormous. By sovereign debt crisis, I don't mean what people, the man in the street might typically say, the UK is bankrupt. Governments that can print their own currency and whose debts are denominated in their own currency, as you know, don't go bankrupt. They just print more and more money. Weimar Germany didn't go bankrupt. They just...
It's a big balance sheet.
Yes, exactly. And we're already getting to the point where, your Laffer curve point, we're getting to the point where it's very difficult to tax anyone anymore, largely because even regular people are beginning to notice that they can't afford anything any longer. So to my mind, the only way of fixing this is via an enormous debasement of the currency. That's the only way that our unfunded civil service pension liabilities are going to be paid. Personally, I'm in my mid-40s. I don't expect to be getting a state pension. I don't see how it's fiscally possible.
I don't see how it would be enough either.
No.
Really. I mean, it's one thing getting a pension; it's another thing it being enough to actually live off. I mean, that time is gone. I think you can live poorly on it if you want, but if you had any kind of life, I think, I mean, that's a whole other point. I was just as you were speaking, then I thought of something. What were you just saying then about?
Were you talking about unfunded pension liabilities? Talking about
the looting of the slow looting of everyone, basically, which is what's happening. And so your result would be some form of collapse in the form of a debasement or a conscious debasement.
I think that, historically, that's what people have done to solve this kind of indebtedness problem. It's there's sort of two related solutions. Israel in the 80s and I think maybe it started in the 70s, but definitely in the 1980s, they had a short period of very, very high inflation, which effectively wiped out a lot of their national, or the real value of a lot of their national debt. And then certainly in 1920s and 30s Germany, we saw 3 or 4 different currencies, I believe, until eventually the third or fourth stabilized. But that was after an enormous period of horrendous hyperinflation. And I'm sure you will have read When Money Dies. Fantastic book. I recommend that to people all the time.
Harrowing.
Yeah.
And really interesting to notice how people live through that kind of situation. I find that fascinating because there's a very, sorry to butt in, there's a slim version of that happening right now. And in as much as in our country, groceries have doubled since the pandemic. That goes without saying now. I know that from my own bills that they've doubled. And that means my income has halved, potentially, because everything's doubled. Inflation doesn't happen in just one sector. It happens everywhere. And in fact, it happens more in a lot of other sectors rather than things like food. So, and you've noticed me start to change the way I live my life already. I know it's not hyperinflation where you spend your paycheck the moment you get it and just stock up on XYZ. But there are versions of that happening now. And the meme that assets are where you store your wealth is suddenly happening all over the place. It's bizarre, I think, and this should be considered a positive thing, I think, in a way. But 10 years ago, I don't think my father-in-law ever spoke about assets. It wasn't something, I mean, if you're in the financial world, it is second nature. But the average person, if you're a teacher or a bus driver or whatever, you don't, the nearest you got to investing was buying British Telecom shares or whatever.
Premium bonds.
Premium bonds, yeah, exactly. But all of a sudden, and a lot of it's to do with Robin Hood and things like that, but all of a sudden, people get this idea that people that have been staying rich have been leveraging their assets. They haven't been holding on to cash. They've been XYZ. And suddenly, it's common knowledge, it seems anyway, which is a good sign because I think that can happen with absolutely everything. And I think the next stage after that is, why is this happening? Oh my God, it's the government.
Yes.
And then you get that point where, and that could be for us next election cycle, where people go, right, I don't want those guys because they were terrible. And I don't want the guys that are in there now as well because they did even worse. Who have we got? And there's some interesting folk coming through, but I'm not sure they have a whole government coming with them, if you know what I mean. I mean, where do they find...
Well, I don't know. You must have seen the latest electoral map predictions for the next election.
I haven't, but are they all in...
I think the latest one I saw had Reform at close to 400 seats.
Wow.
Which would be a total wipeout for both Labour and the Conservatives. And I believe that poll was conducted before Jeremy Corbyn's new party, which would leak some...
doesn't exist, does it?
Well, it'll steal some vote from Labour.
No, but it doesn't. His new party is just it's like a white paper, isn't it?
Oh, well, yeah.
It doesn't exist yet. He's just said, I'm going to do this. I hate it. It was like the announcement before the announcement. Wasn't it?
Yeah, but by the time, incredibly, we've got, was it 4 years until the next, 3-4 years until the next election, 29?
Well, there's a petition online now of people saying we need another election already. One of those online petitions where they have to, I know nothing will happen, but it's got, I saw it yesterday, it's got 500,000 signatures on it.
Well, that itself is indicative.
Which is almost as much as,
well,
I mean, how many people voted in the last election? Anyway.
Yes, but that shows, to your point, are we seeing a desire for change in the UK? The fact that poll's got 500,000 signatures in the space of about a week, it tells you how, because that'll be a subset of the people who are discontent. That's a relatively small subset of people who are motivated enough to find that poll, to bother to click on it, and then to verify their email address. So those 500,000 people have gone through quite a lot of hoops in order to get their names in that poll. There are vastly more people who are discontent.
I wonder if it had online safety on it, because you have to be 18 to vote.
Oh, oh my gosh, that would be hilarious. If they've...
No, but is it harmful stuff? I mean, voting's pretty harmful if you think it's going to change anything.
Well, it's harmful if you're in a government that's about to lose power.
Yes, for them.
Yes. My big worry, though, is that we obviously tried the Conservatives and the coalition government for 14 years. That was a disaster. Labour is an unfolding disaster at the moment. Whoever comes in is going to have one chance before people completely switch off. and we effectively get into, and I actually don't know what the conclusion there will be. If you get voter turnout of 9 or 10% at subsequent elections, because people say, well, we've tried literally everyone and it's all been terrible. And the country is clearly run not by whichever bunch of idiots we vote into power, but is run by a faceless grey mob of bureaucrats, and who are unaccountable to the people. So I think
the civil service doesn't change either.
No, it doesn't.
That's the whole point.
I think that's that,
because I know they're not allowed to be political, but they are political.
Oh,
everyone's political. You have a leaning, don't you?
And they're almost all, well-educated Oxbridge people who lean slightly left. Which is I'm not making it. That's not a value judgment. It's just an observation. Largely because a lot of them are my friends. If you come into power and you did something about the civil service, though, I think that would make a really interesting change. Like Vivek Ramaswamy, I don't know if you saw a couple of interviews with him while he was still running for president. He said his plan was to come in and he would, I forget how he was going to do it. He was either going to do it via random selection of social security numbers or give everyone an A and a B. And then he said, right, all the Bs are fired.
That's a kind of Millet move, isn't it? That's the kind of thing Millet would do.
Yes, and then see if the
But he didn't get in, did he?
No, he didn't.
And he didn't get anywhere near getting in either. I mean, he was liked by people, but at the end of the day, the competition was won by the celebrity guy, which doesn't... I mean, what's your take on America? And because America is the place... in my mind anyway, it's the libertarian country. It's the one with the interesting... It's the one that took our model and improved it and implemented it, and it's still the place that has an identity of liberty on the whole. When you go there, it's like you says there's a large section of the population that actually believe in this stuff and are prepared to defend their houses if you come and tell them what to do, and stuff like that. So what's your take on that? Because like I said earlier, my worry with anything happening in the UK is that a similar but more exaggerated version of what happened in America recently happened, which is Trump's really exciting because he's going to smash the blob. He's going to destroy the deep state. And then you realize now there are some things that he appears to be doing, especially in the Bitcoin space. And that's my meter that I would look at, because that's all I really care about. I'm a voter of... I think if someone's pro-Bitcoin, I'm going to vote for them because I think Bitcoin is a long-term solution, whether they know it or not, to the problem of government. Mainly because it takes away the ability to fund yourself by just basically creating money from your mates,
And the flip side of that, if someone's opposed to Bitcoin, they're probably a wrong un.
Yes. And that, and you can see that now around the world. Where is Bitcoin forbidden? Do you want to live there?
Yes.
No.
That's a good,
right. Well,
good
it's
heuristic.
No, I mean, it's an obvious one.
Yes.
It's really. So I do use that as a signal. So what's your take on America? Do you think change is actually happening there, or do you think that it's, as a lot of people think, it's the Roman Empire thing, it's the declining end of an empire, biggest government that's ever existed, I think.
I mean, I find America fascinating for a lot of the reasons that you've said. I absolutely love the founding principles of the United States.
Me too.
The Constitution is a phenomenally well-drafted document, and I profoundly admire the minds of the people who created it, who decided how much power they were willing to cede to the state and how much they would... as far as I know, it's the only country where people voluntarily chose how much power to give up to the state rather than finding themselves oppressed by the state from the moment of their birth. And a lot of the Americans that I know and like hold those principles and actually think about them in a way that British people don't. And I wonder sometimes if that's because all of the British people who thought and felt like that went. And,
yes.
And the people who stayed, and we are the descendants of the people who stayed behind. I wonder if there's some kind of evolutionary selection pressure.
Almost certainly. I mean, it almost certainly is, because I think that's why the attitude is in America. It's something you're born with there in a very subtle way. It's not something you necessarily learn. I think you can learn it, but...
Well, I mean, I'm a sort of weird descendant of sort of obstreperous colonials myself. My family had various stints in South America and in Africa. twice in Africa. My great-grandmother was born in South Africa, and then my family, I grew up in Zimbabwe myself.
Wow, Zimbabwe.
Yeah, so...
Wow, that's... Were you in Zimbabwe when all the shit was going down?
Some. Actually, you were mentioning earlier around, it was when we were talking about Bukele, I remember something about Mugabe. When Mugabe came in, people forget that he was a popular president, and when I was a kid, Zimbabwe was a wonderful place to live and to grow up in. And unfortunately, as he clung on to power, his government became increasingly sclerotic and repressive and undemocratic. So we saw a sort of live fire exercise of what happens when, a popular freedom fighter basically comes into power and then suddenly decides to ruthlessly stamp down on opposition. And then obviously the hyperinflation, but it wasn't as bad when I left. It was inflation was running about 50-60%. In the mid to late 90s when I left. But a lot of my friends stayed there, so I left just before sixth form.
Still there now?
Very few, one or two. But yeah, close friend of mine actually, I know for a fact his family had savings which were entirely wiped out, and that's true for the majority of people who had cash savings at the time. I think at its worst, hyperinflation got so bad that it was no longer possible to put a number on it. And I mean, it was just an extraordinarily weird...
I've got $100 billion note, actually. I bought it in what do you call it? Amsterdam. I found a shop in Amsterdam. It's a lovely little place that sells old currencies. And I walked past and I went on the off chance. I even got 100 billion. It cost me like 60 euros.
Yeah, it's a lot more than it would have been worth at the time.
Right, exactly. But it's a phenomenal looking thing, and it's a pristine one. It's an A. It's like never been crunched up. Not that they were being used anyway. They were just bundled up in piles, weren't they?
No, people were using the US dollar. In fact, the physical US dollars in the country are now beginning to collapse, and actually the paper's disintegrating because they use so much.
Wow. Do they use stable coins down there? Or is the technology not really?
Beginning. So a friend of mine, actually, a school friend, set up a business called Cash, which is designed to help with cross-border remittances, and they'll use stablecoin and Bitcoin as well. And I'm in touch with the Bitcoin movement in Zimbabwe. I've joined a few calls, done a few spaces with them. Hopefully I'll be going back to the Africa Bitcoin conference this year. I attended in Kenya last year, although sadly there weren't many Zimbos. A few friends from Zambia. Some guys have crossed the border and are now actually mining in Zambia in some instances.
Bitcoin mining.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got to be careful when you say mining in Africa.
Yeah, actually, it's funny. So I mentioned my great-grandmother. Her dad then moved from South Africa to, as it was, Northern Rhodesia. There's a mine named after her mother somewhere. He was a copper miner. But yeah, so back to my sort of slightly random point. I feel a little bit different from a lot of people I went to school and university with in the UK, and I think partly because I'd grown up in these slightly rough and ready places where something goes wrong, you fix it, you make a plan. You don't. I mean, our cars were held together with chicken wire and ingenuity on the streets, and unfortunately, you see the same in countries like Cuba, which is devastating impacts of both the political situation and poor government. And you mentioned Trump coming in and everyone thinking he was going to drain the swamp. And I mean, fundamentally, I think gigantic bureaucracies only ever kill themselves. I can't think of an instance where someone has successfully come in. Well, Millet is a work in progress.
Is Millet actually reducing the size of government? I mean, has anyone... I know that he's got inflation down, and I know that people love him, and this is all good. But is he actually reducing the size of government? Because I think that is the solution. The only solution I can ever come back to is the government is too big. Because if the government was, and as you said, as a sort of left-leaning libertarian, roughly the real purpose of a government. When it comes down to it, the government shouldn't be telling your kids not to look at porn. The government should be
defending private property
on the whole, yeah, or maybe a few other bits and bobs as well. A lot of people are undecided about that. The main point is it should be tiny in the same sense of the founding fathers. There was no need for to fleece people of money to sort of like fund themselves. They had very limited job titles, and it worked beautifully.
Yeah.
But well, I mean, there was a lot of infighting and stuff, I suppose. But I don't know where I'm going with this. It's just the government needs to be small, basically.
Yes, I mean it's an interesting observation at the moment. So we were talking earlier about Dubai and the free zones, trying to map countries which have relatively low tax rates against sort of energy producing nations is an interesting mind game to play. I mentioned earlier that governments are an unproductive enterprise, but if the state effectively has an energy monopoly, everything for me always comes back to energy. If the state's able to fund itself through its energy resources, then it technically doesn't really need to tax anyone. I often return to the idea that the only reason it's a bit of a facetious point, but I think there's some truth in it. The only reason the state needs to tax people is to prove to the international bond markets that it's going to be good for the money, that it can service its debts that other nations are buying, and can pay the coupon on those debts. Because I mentioned earlier, obviously, most states only have two sources of income: bond markets and their own citizens. To the extent I'm far from a fan of state-run enterprises, and again, we're in a country which is a living demonstration of why they don't work. But to the extent that you have energy-rich nations, they don't need to tax their population so much because a lot of their income is derived from oil, and so Saudi Aramco is a perfect example. Obviously, we're not in a great position for energy abundance in the United Kingdom, as we're seeing in terms of our electricity bill. So maybe the UK is not a good example there. But and again, I don't necessarily want governments to have more money because they'll probably just spend them on more civil servants.
Yeah, but don't forget that Dubai has began in this sphere, but then pivoted. And one of the places it innovated the most was in financial services. Dubai Financial District. Well, the UK's got a massive financial hub.
True.
You know, why not? Like Dubai is I know people either love or hate Dubai, but I think you should look at Dubai from the governance perspective and see it's basically a family run, 7 families that run 7 jurisdictions. Now, a lot of people don't like that already because they think it's undemocratic. Well, tough shit. The kings and queens run countries often much better than democracies do because they get to think longer term. They can decide, right, if my son's going to inherit this, we've got a good 100 years of governance here. The problem with those kind of places, if you get a bad guy, if your son's an idiot, he can run the place into the ground, and that does happen. But on the whole, like I said earlier, people go to Dubai because they receive a good service. Government should be a service. They go there to receive a good service. If the service is bad, they often will leave as quickly as they went. If Dubai starts spiraling out of control and turning into an absolute nightmare that they don't like, people are going to go. And that's the way governance should work, government should be competing for you, not seeing you as just a way to generate income. And unfortunately, Dubai has that option. It had some wealth behind it from resources. It doesn't need to do it. And it treats its own citizens incredibly well. Like Emiratis, they're only 10% of the population there, but they are given a lot of stuff.
Same with Qataris, actually.
Right, yeah. And as a result, they're happy. All the incomers are happy because they're hardly being taxed at all. The only reason they're actually being taxed is because of pressure from the rest of the world to say, hey, it's not fair. You know about that, right?
Yes.
They would be happy if there was a single tax rate for the whole world that everyone had to comply to. And all that is doing away with competition again. And it's like, this is the thing that keeps coming up. Governments want to eradicate competition between them and other people. And the problem that they run like that. They don't need to compete. They don't care. If your local council runs out of money, they're not going to lose their job. The guys aren't going to lose their job. They're going to just charge you more for a bin.
And the people who cause the problem will probably be the ones who are paid to try and fix it and will fail.
Yeah, exactly. And they've got a pension. during the pandemic, they were treated very well. It's almost like the rules were based around those kind of jobs. The whole thing is an absolute shit show. We're so far down the route. Anyway, back to the question about America. Are you positive? Do you think something's happening there? Is there something good happening?
I'm generally quite sanguine about it. I'm certainly, given the contrast between the Biden administration and the Trump administration. Weirdly, I'm obviously not an American voter, and my opinions of the Biden administration were mainly based on his aggressive pursuit and attack on Bitcoin and the industry in general.
Nothing wrong with that. Like I say, it's the canary in the coal mine.
Yeah,
it really is.
And I think you're completely right. It was your 1 second test as to whether it's a good place.
Yeah, or a good person.
Yeah, good person. Yeah.
I mean, if you do it with a person, I don't like speaking about him, but he's come up a number of times recently on this podcast, Gary's Economics.
Oh, Christ.
Right, yeah, but he's a perfect example
Yes.
of someone who speaks authoritatively about Bitcoin and doesn't understand it at all.
Yeah, no understanding.
Right, so that's my red flag in a personal relationship as well. It's fine to not understand Bitcoin, but if you talk about it authoritatively, right, I doubt everything you're saying now.
Well, exactly. It's completely undermined my belief in the FT. No,
are they backing him? I didn't even know that.
Oh no! I meant their attitude, their incorrect attitude towards Bitcoin for the last 15 years.
I thought he was becoming a columnist at the MT or something.
It got to the point where I was thinking, the old joke, if those who can do and those who can't teach, and if you can't do either, you work for the FT.
Right.
But anyway, you're completely right. He speaks about it with great authority and great conviction, and he looks like the kind of man who's never even turned on a computer.
He's also a closet socialist, and I'm not sure he even understands that. But the reason I think Gary's a really good, interesting example is he defaults to the government solving the problem without even a thought, I think. And it's important because I think a lot of people think the same way. When a problem arises, they look to the government, and there's a much bigger view of that whole equation, which is it the government's problem? Is it their fault? Should they solve it? But people don't. We especially in the UK, we live in such an ingrained system where the government solves problems. Like, I'm poor, right? The government's not helping me. That's the kind of natural response to it from so many people. Whereas you find in America, it's a bit more of a, pick yourself up by your bootstraps kind of place.
Well, I think I grew up in a country where if you were poor, no one was coming to help you. If you were poor, you lived on the freaking streets. And I think that's very deeply ingrained into me from when I was a small child. I grew up in a scenario in a country where there were no free schools. Every kid who went to school, their parents paid, even a small amount. The government schools were charged fees. There was no free healthcare. It was a tough place to grow up. But it forged people who were incentivized to change things. So your point's completely correct. We do have this mental attitude that someone will look after us, someone else will fix this. Why are the roads full of potholes? Now you see Rod Stewart out the front of his house filling in holes. Yeah. There's a video from somewhere filling in a pothole outside his own house because the local council isn't able to do it.
And in this terrible state of our system, I wouldn't be surprised if someone from the bureaucratic system came to stop him and said it's our job.
Yes.
I mean, this is how ridiculous everything's becoming. And when you look at that, it's the collectivist versus the individualist. The individualist says, "Oh, there's a pothole outside my house. Right, I'm going to go and fix it." The collectivists are like, "Wait a minute, no. Whose job is that?"
And we've also over-regulated at the point where if you fill in a pothole with incorrect material, then perhaps that is now going to create a health and safety problem where some other regulation has been tripped. That's been filled in with gravel, not with bitumen. That's not going to meet with, the Highways Agency standards for road composition. And you have so many different interlocking layers and rules that effectively there's something that a lot of the Silicon Valley company directors talk about. It's a bias for action. As a country in the United Kingdom, we've completely lost our bias for action. we now have a throw your hands up in the air and wait for someone else to fix it attitude. And unfortunately, I mean, if I had to sort of sum up a lot of my frustration with this, is that we need to take more personal responsibility for actions and really look at the way that our system functions and understand what it is about the system that stops us from taking those actions. And is there then anything that we can do about it? And actually, returning to something we said recently, if a government comes in and really decides to make those kind of changes to try and reduce the size of the civil service or get rid of unnecessary, some regulation is good. For example, I think it's sensible that we have a legal system which protects people's rights to own property, and I know to have those property rights enforced in a court of law. Fine. The Bat Tunnel I return to a lot. Have you read this story on HS2? They had spent £100 million building a tunnel for some bats which may actually not even be there.
100 million.
100 million, yeah.
I know people that have been done on bat houses when they've been doing an extension on their house, yes. And that was like 60 grand, but 100 million. That's
it was because the line was going to run through an area of woodland in which it was alleged some of these endangered bats might live, but it wasn't proven that they were actually there. But this is why we can't do anything in our country.
Well, interestingly, I was speaking to Michael Manelli, the Lord Mayor of London,
yes,
on the last pod. He's big into regulation and understanding that, and he did make a really valid point that I hadn't really hit home on me prior to that conversation, which is most regulation arises out of the industry. You think of regulation as being something the government does. It's something that they might enforce, but really most sectors create regulation because they want their products to be good, and they want some kind of, people to believe in them, or, the perfect example is cruise ships, which are private floating cities, basically. And there's no guy from the government on board enforcing the regulations. But they create their regulations there in order that their customers have a good experience and they don't lose their customers, which was, so the regulation things are often quite misunderstood. It's just always it's bloody regulation. It's this, it's terrible.
Yeah, I'd agree with that from maybe two perspectives. One, sort of standardization, which I think is a good form of regulation. And that's the kind of experience that I think you're describing on like a Carnival cruise ship. You know that the industry has certain standards which are then enforced by the courts and by the government. The other sort of negative flip side of that, where I might sort of challenge him slightly, is that yes, industries often do push for regulation because it creates a regulatory moat and reduces competition. So that, I think what he said is true, but it can have positive and negative outcomes. If what you're doing is creating a moat such that no new entrant can ever break into your company. And actually, interestingly, this is what we saw. I'm going to get the technology wrong. The United States Postal Service, I think, tried to push back against either Telegram or the email. You probably know the story.
I don't, but I was going to say email.
Could have been that. There was some form of. I'm so sorry. I can't recall the exact story. It was worth digging up. It's quite an old story, and it was around whether or not email should be effectively run by a particular bot. And obviously, the war was successfully fought. Email is the SMTP protocol is an open protocol, and anyone can use it and build on it. But that was an interesting example. And I think, returning to the money question, Bitcoin undermines the state's monopoly of money, which is why a lot of defensive states don't like it. And tying that back into America, the fact that America has now looked at Bitcoin and seen all of its manifest advantages, I think is a hugely positive step forwards, because usually where America goes, the world follows, even reluctantly.
I did, though, hear recently, which was an interesting take. I think it was Preston Pish was saying that the US's interest in Bitcoin and particular stable coins, because they're so closely related, is to do with them requiring liquidity for sovereign debt.
Oh, I completely agree.
Right. Okay. But it's not all. No, but I think a lot of people would look at what you said and think, wow, they support Bitcoin. They believe in liberty and freedom and all this kind of stuff.
Well, I think Preston's point, I completely agree on the stablecoin front. It's very important for there to be global demand for United States dollars. And I think they've got some very, very clever people who've looked at the stablecoin market and realized that it is only going to grow exponentially. And it's a fantastic way of creating US dollar demand in countries that can't normally access US dollars. It's basically the same as the Eurodollar market
Right.
in the 70s and 80s. You enable offshore entities to create US dollars via making bonds denominated in dollars. The US doesn't know no one knows how many dollars were created in the Eurodollar market.
I don't think many people knew it existed until recently. I think it's just been talked about.
It's got a geeky thing that people. I mean, even
I know,
I
but
was
it's a
never
really
confused.
important thing to understand. I don't understand it. I've dug into the Eurodollar thing, and I kind of get it, but I don't really understand it. I don't really understand how it functions. Yeah.
I mean, very few people do, but at its simplest, let's say you're a bank in Luxembourg and you make me a loan and you denominate that loan in US dollars, you've just created some US dollars.
But that seems really weird.
It is. yeah. But I mean, I find it all delightfully weird, but they're sort of weird. I mean, this is why I don't have conversations at the dinner table, because if I start talking about this kind of stuff, my wife will just get up and leave. But I find it all geekily fascinating.
Look, we're over an hour and a half, and you've got a hard stop. I know. I want to leave on a positive note, though. From your perspective, from where you are, and like I say, you've got a unique perspective because you're in that sector that a lot of people don't have access to, I think. How do we deal with this going forward? And I mean this problem of constant state encroachment, bad governance, and those are the two main things. What does the individual do? The normal person who's just trying to run a business or just living their life. What should they do?
Again, trying to end positively, I suggest sort of two fronts, one macro and one individual. So on the macro level, I think it's very important to try and make it clear to the people for whom we vote that there is an increasing groundswell for a reduction in the cost of running the state, however that's achieved. And that covers all kinds of things that we've been talking about. The impossibility of building infrastructure in the UK, the fact that there's no money for councils, the fact that pension liabilities are unfunded, the fact that we have too many civil servants, and that getting those, I'm sure, good civil servants to do anything is borderline impossible because of the loopholes that they have to go through. So reducing the cost of running the state is hugely important, and voting for people who have in their manifesto they want to do that, I think, is an important step. It may not be successful, but it's a step in the right direction. And then on an individual level, I mentioned earlier, well, we are very much on the back foot in terms of privacy and surveillance, but there are a lot of new pieces of what's commonly called freedom tech coming to market. Jack Dorsey's BitChat is a great example. If you haven't downloaded it, you probably have, but any of your listeners, that's a fantastic piece of software. It sits on your phone and it enables you to create a mesh network using Bluetooth with other people who use it. That kind of technology is going to be extraordinarily powerful. Your point earlier, which is what made me think about it, around needing permission to go on the internet. Other forms of internet communication exist, and a localized mesh network is one of them. And using facilities like Starlink is another. To the extent that you can reach outside a firewall that your country may be intending to impose, learn about those kind of technologies now before you need them. There are lots of them out there. There is a list of them in sort of my pinned tweet at the moment. An increasing number of companies and people and programmers and developers are working on this kind of stuff. And it is possible to use a browser like DuckDuckGo or like Opera, which have built-in VPNs which don't track you. You can pay for VPNs like Mulvad using Bitcoin without surrendering your personal information. Explore those, understand them, learn how to buy Bitcoin KYC free. prudently, if you're going to buy Bitcoin, I'd suggest that you maintain a KYC stack and a non-KYC stack. You can then, if for example, you ever need to sell any, you can prove chain of title for the KYC stack. Explore operating systems like Graphene OS that you can use on an Android phone, which again won't track you, won't surveil you, won't sell your data to other people. And again, a lot of this, I think, is precautionary steps that an individual can take. We don't necessarily need to use them yet because we still don't quite live in a police state. But if we ever did, it's just as well to have made those preparatory steps first and know that you're a little bit ahead of the game rather than how everyone else will be.
Freddie, many thanks.
Thank you, Jim.
I've enjoyed talking to you. I really enjoyed it. And I'm surprised you're being so candid about things like that. When I hear people say things like that, I think, dude, they're coming to get you.
Well, I put a lot of this stuff after the online safety hack came, and then I thought maybe I hope MFO don't have a file.
Maybe that's to do with your past and where you grew up and stuff. You were used to living a little bit on the edgier side.
Perhaps, but no, I think it's important. And remember that there are more of us than there are of them.
Correct, but as I always think, I've decided to put myself in a public arena, but that makes you a target and makes you a very simple and easy target, in fact, and one that might be chosen because you can be made an example out of. But it is important for people to publicly talk about these things. It is. It's just a horrible, horrible situation to be in, I find.
Although staying positive,
yes,
there are still things we can do.
I'm like that guy, I know, the painter.
Yeah.
What's that with the guy with the fuzzy hair? And then he ends up painting the thing.
Yeah.
Right, we're ending on a good one. Freddie, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
And I look forward to hearing your talk today later at Honey Badger.
Thank you. Real pleasure to have me on. Thank you.